We are talking about speech development for children with autism. And I'm going to talk about the look at sentence strip. So, the look at sentence strip is something that I use with my children with autism, and it's been extremely powerful. And I want to share this little trick with you today because I want you to try it on your back porch and see if you see what I'm finding on my back porch. Over 20 years ago, when I started as a speech pathologist, I would use the I want sentence strip. Now, I'm going to tell you the story behind it and why I changed that to look at. For instance, if the child wants balls, the child over 20 years ago, I would do, I want balls. And then I changed that to look at balls 20 years ago, and I haven't changed back since. I'll give you a caveat and tell you an exception at the very end. But why am I using look at balls instead of I want balls? And what has the impact been in doing so? Let's go back in time so I can answer this question. So 20 years ago, I was at a workshop by Amy Weatherby, who she's at a Florida State University, and she has something known as the CSBS scales that look at communication before the age of 3. She was sharing her research 20 years ago that she was doing at the time, in which she was looking at home videos of children who had later on been diagnosed with autism. She wanted to see what was different in the first year or the first 2 years of life with autism. How were they different from the children with developmental delays and the children who are neurotypical? So she looked at the videos of children with autism, children with developmental delays, and children who are neurotypical. She wanted to see how were they different? What were some things that we could see as markers and how they communicated in the very first year or the very first 2 years of life, so we could have some ideas early on these children were at risk for developing autism based on their style of communication. So this was 20 years ago. I had the great pleasure of seeing her. She came to the Detroit area and was sharing the research she was doing and looking at the videotapes that parents had submitted of their young babies and toddlers how many years back that had currently been diagnosed as autism or that were currently neurotypical or that currently had a developmental delay. And what she found was fascinating. She found that the children were much, much less likely to communicate for social purposes, to comment. She found that they were more likely to request things. So they were more likely to reach for something they wanted or protest things, push something away that they didn't want, but they were less likely to comment. For instance, the wound up toy is chattering its teeth and doing something cool. And to look over to the adult and look back at the wind up toy, like, do you see this? This is really cool. That's commenting. So, this is known as a triadic form of communication. And it's triadic in that you have a triad, you have the activity or object at hand, you have the communication partner, and you have the child. And it's all communing together, a triangle. The child is taking the partner's attention through eye gaze, through pointing, through gestures, through speech, saying, look, and they're drawing it to the activity or the object. So there's a triangle there, right? They're shifting. Now, when we look at these forms of communication, they were doing very little of that compared to the children with developmental delays and the children who are neurotypical. So I thought, well, we really want to do more of that. We really want to foster them doing more communication for commenting or social purposes. So I thought, what could I do? Now, if you know my research, I do research in which I only manipulate a single variable within the intervention. And then I look and I say, does that make a significant difference? So, what I thought, what would be really cool is to take my I want sentence strip that I was using. So, if you know about picture exchange communication system, that's the level 4 in picture exchange communication system. It's simply a strip that says I want, and you put the sticker of what it is at the end, balls, right? I want balls. So I thought, why don't I make my sentence strip look at balls? And then when the child says look at, You're making a comment. You're taking someone's attention. You're creating joint attention. You're saying, look at the balls, right? And then as they're doing it, they're pointing to the word look, look. They're pointing to the word at, and they're pointing to the symbol balls. Look at the balls. So gesturally, they're drawing attention to the words, look at the balls. I want the balls. And then the communication they're using, the word look is a container of thought. It's saying, hey, you, communicative act, I want you to look at something. What I thought is by using the words look at and having the child point as they read the words or as the words are read, you're creating that communicative act of triadic communication. As William Labov said, words are containers of thoughts. You're saying, hey, you look at this strip here. Look at this item. And then you pull that item out. They're saying, I want balls. Well, okay, so they did look at balls. Then what was happening is from changing that sentence strip from I want to look at, when the children did develop speech, unlike in the past where their first words were things they loved the most, they were saying cars, they were saying cookies. If there was food was their thing, they were saying food words. If vehicles were the things, they were saying trains. They were saying words of things they loved. That's not what was happening. When I changed the I want sentence strip to look at, the children were pointing all over the place and saying, look, look. So they'd point outside and they'd say, look, yeah, look, it's a tree. Look, 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 look. This is the golden apple. This is known as triadic communication. This is joint attention. This is what is most predictive of greater outcomes later on, is joint attention. So make no mistake about it. It's communication is always good. When you look at these children early on, hey, if they're communicating for behavior regulation in which they're requesting or protesting, the more of that they do early on, the better the outcomes. Or another form of communication is known as something where they're communicating to get someone's attention. So if they're looking at someone and smiling, that's a bit at attention, that type of communication. And if they're doing that type of social interaction communication, where they're like, where they look up and they're like, "Ah," and they smile and they just want your attention. That's wonderful. So the more they do of that, the greater the prognosis. But then we have the golden apple. The golden apple is when we're doing triadic communication. And that's what happened when I put the sentence strip and I changed it from I want to look at. I was suddenly, because of maybe language being a container of thought and the act of the child pointing to the words as they were spoken, I was fostering the development, kind of like using a maximum level of prompts and doing it, of triadic communication, in which the child was requesting your attention to the activity or action at hand. What happened by simply changing those two words, I want to look at, and not changing anything else, is I had children who were developing the ability of triadic communication naturally. And these were children with autism. They were asking not for objects and actions, they were asking for joint attention, in which they're referencing me, look, you at the tree outside. It's not because I want the tree, it's not because I want your attention, it's because I want to engage in triadic communication with you, which is the most complex form of communication. Now, what was amazing about this, and those of you who listen to me, you know how the complexity approach has really improved my practice when it comes to the treatment target. So I've talked about how I focus on clusters, 3-element clusters to be exact. I go for the gold, and I get really big gains in speech as a result. I focus on, if I want to improve language skills, I focus on narratives. And as a result, I get big gains in language development. When it comes to social communication, you can focus on the request, which is something. Well, you can take it up a level. You can focus on social interaction, right? In which the child's either waving hi or bye-bye. And that's something, or you can go for the gold. And if you go for the gold, this is what I'm finding. I can't say here's a study in which they did this with group A and they did this with group B and it was a random assignment and here's statistical significance. I can't give you that. I can only give you my clinical experience and the theoretical reasoning behind it. I can give you this is the research to indicate that this is an area that is a specific area of deficit for children with autism, triadic communication. And it's also highly prognostic of later outcomes. So this is something we really care about. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is put your eggs in that basket. And what's going to happen when you put your eggs in that basket? When you say, I'm going to focus on triadic communication, how I'm going to do it, I'm going to change the words I want to look at. Is you're going to find there's a cascading impact in which the child naturally develops the ability to request objects, to protest. They're really good actually at protesting. And most children are. But they also naturally develop the ability to use communication for social interaction. And that's because you have the cascading impact in which you focus on the more complex skill, in this case, triadic communication. And you're going to get the simpler skill, social interaction, and the simpler skill of behavior regulation using communication to request and protest. You're going to get those for free. So, what also tends to happen is the children, when you use the look at, you get all of this for free, but what happens is it happens at a faster rate. So once again, challenge creates change. The higher you aim, the higher the gains. Now, in this situation, once again, it didn't take, this is no extra effort, not only on my part, but on the child's part to engage in this more complex target of using look at instead of I want. However, the benefit in doing this is much greater. So I can only tell you from my clinical experience, since I switched to look at, what I found is that the children were developing social communication skills naturally. And the children were doing a lot more pointing naturally. And the children were doing a lot more commenting naturally. And the children were easily requesting that. That just came spontaneously. I didn't have to teach that. And the children were easily calling for my attention. Miss Kelly, I didn't have to teach them to do that. You do the hard things first. And then by the cascading impact, you get the easier things for free. We're lifting the 100-pound dumbbell. I don't have to work with you on the 15 or the 5. You can do that in your sleep. It's the same principle. Challenge creates change. The higher you aim, the higher the gains, period. This is why I use the look at sentence strip. Now, I promised you that I would give you an example, an exception to that. So I have this one girl that I work with, and she's highly motivated by food. She's a foodie. In her snack time area, every day she uses the I want sentence strip. She says I want every single time. It is consistent. So she has that motor planning, motor programming. The speech is coming out 100% of the time. I want to capitalize on that. I'm going to take that I want phrase and use it in therapy. Am I using food in therapy? No, I don't use food in therapy. I'm using the literacy activities, which she loves with her. If we're doing a literacy activity, this activity, I have it right here. We're doing Rafi's book. We're going to shake, shake, shake your sillies out. Shake, shake, shake your sillies out. We're shake, shake, shake your sillies out. So I will go ahead and I'll stick the sticker on. And I will use an I want sentence here. I have look at, but instead of using look at, I'll use I want shake head. So we're going to shake her head. We're going to shake, shake, shake her head. I'm going to use, instead of look at, I want. Why am I going to use I want? Because she has consistency with I want. And the more she talks, the better. I'm going to say, hey, this is something you're consistent with, just like if you're consistent with letters and numbers, we'll start there because I want you every single time coming through with the speech. So I'm going to use I want And then you're probably going to say the word after that because the speech has been initiated. I know that you have an interest in literacy and reading. That is your love language. And that's how we're going to develop the speech. I don't want you to be black and white and say, this is what I do with all of my children. Therapy is, of course, a dynamic process, and there's always exceptions to the rule. But I will share with you from my back porch that switching to the look at instead of I want, which I did 20 years ago and I haven't looked back, was a total game changer. So you'll have to let me know and give it a try on your back porch if that is impacting how your children who are minimally speaking or inconsistently speaking, developing their communication skills as well. Well, I want you to take all of this information and hopefully I will see you at the SIS drawing board so you can like really roll up your sleeves and get to work with me and do what you do best, which is make the world a better place, one child at a time. You are always going to be first.